Ah, the good old days. We all have our versions of them. For some of us, it was when grape or cherry was the biggest decision we had to make. And for some of us, many of you who are watching right now, it was when you knew what to expect from your relationship with your children. Renowned author and speaker Dr. Jim Burns understands the challenges and changing dynamics of parenting your children as they get older. You may no longer be in the good old days, but as we hope you discover over the next half hour, you can create a new version of the good old days, especially when it comes to doing life with your adult children.
So I was asked to speak at a conference in Hawaii. I wanted to go to Hawaii, but it was the topic of parenting your adult child. I laughed and I said, absolutely not. I do not want to speak on that subject. I'll speak for you, but don't even slot me in the section on parenting your adult child, because Kathy and I are in desperate need. We've got 3 adult kids. We need to go to that session. Well, at that point, they wouldn't take no for an answer. And so they talked me into doing it. And so I said, okay, we'll do it. So I'm standing before these people in a crowd. And I said, wow, for Kathy and I, we didn't see it coming, this adult child. And in fact, I don't know if you're like us, but many parents of adults' children see their lives changing dramatically because they see their kids violating values, they see their kids straying from faith, they see their kids kind of having a failure to launch, if you would, marrying someone or dating someone that they don't really even like. Well, in reality, still on the family payroll. At that point, everybody groaned. I've probably had people groan when I've spoken before, but usually they do it silently. This was an audible groan. And I realized that day, that moment, that really they were experiencing similar things to what we were experiencing. I remember when our kids became adults, and I oftentimes put quotes around the word adult for my kids. They were 18 saying, but I'm an adult, but we were paying for everything. And Kathy said, I thought it was supposed to be easier. I really didn't realize how complicated it was going to be as they became adults. Now, we have great kids, and literally the highlight of my life is my adult children, and actually I now have 2 grandchildren. But we have experienced the struggles that so many others have experienced. And what I want to do is introduce 9 principles for doing life with your adult children. And I want to do it in the hope of addressing some of the key points and some of the key pain, to give you some strategies that can help your relationships become strong and help your relationships become healthy. Now, it's based on study, it's based on research. I spent a lot of time, many, many years doing the research, but it's also born from the personal lab of my own life, which has not always been easy, frankly. I've had to learn that doing life with your adult children means learning how to keep my mouth shut and the welcome mat out. And that pretty much is the title of a book I wrote, but it also summarizes kind of what we're talking about here. No one said it was going to be easy, but the rewards of living, I think some of these tried and true principles are life-changing. I think they're encouraging, and I think they're filled with hope. Now, I like to remind parents often that we have to be nice to our adult children, because basically they're the ones who are going to take away the car keys one day and usher us into the convalescent hospital, which is kind of frightening to think about. So let's get started with the 9 principles of doing life with your adult children. And I want to start by saying this. Are you ready? You're fired. As a day-to-day parent, you've spent 2 decades of your life parenting your kids, and now you're fired as a day-to-day parent. Now, of course, I'm trying to be a little funny with the being fired, but it's true. And it sets up our first principle, and this is the first principle. Your role as a parent must change. Your role as a parent must change. You and your kids are going on a parallel journey. You're learning for the very first time how to be a parent of an adult child, and frankly, your kids are also learning how to be adult children, and that's not easy. I remember when our kids were younger and we went through the weaning process. Well, what I realize is you're kind of weaning your kids. It's not easy for the weenie or the wiener. So you've invested these 2 decades of your life basically in charge of your kids, and now things change quickly. So your role literally must change. And it begins by firing yourself as a day-to-day parent. They're still gonna call you mom, they're still gonna call you dad. And how you do this and how you set up this new job description, I think can really make a difference. So the new job description, you've got to hand them the passport to adulthood. I've never met a parent that said my kids are ready for the passport to adulthood, but in reality, that's part of that job description. How do we hand our kids the passport to adulthood? We do this by rewriting the script of our parenting, and no one said this was going to be easy. We have to give them control, if you would. We have to be encouraging, but not intrusive, say. We have to be caring, but not necessarily enabling dependency. Sometimes parents enable dependency because they have their own needs to be met. And in the midst of it all, we have to have absolutely serious fun with our kids. And that really does make a difference. Fun does make a difference. And yet it's hard when sometimes they are violating the very values that we probably tried to instill in them. So remember that letting our children go is one of the necessary losses that most parents will experience as their kids become adults. But that's not a bad thing.
Any of this connecting with you? You know, it's my guess that if you're the parent of an adult child, you feel the struggle of a changing parental role, and you want to know how to do the things I've mentioned. Things like be encouraging without being intrusive, to be caring, and reinforce independence, and to have serious fun while you're doing it. Well, did you know that a lot of it starts by applying one simple strategy? And that strategy is to, well, be quiet, or to put it another way, keep your mouth shut and the welcome mat out.
Well, it's not always fun, but it's an important practice to master. So here's why unsolicited advice is often seen as criticism. Now, I could show you the scars on my tongue from practicing this principle. I'm the guy who always has to bite my tongue. And yet, if you don't encourage independence, then your adult children will eventually flee from you because they want independence. I remember saying to my adult child, Christy, may I ask you something, and then can I give you some advice? And she said, not now, Dad. And I'm thinking, wait, I get paid to give advice, but my daughter didn't want it right then. Interestingly enough, she finally did come back and ask, but she needed to do it on her time, on her terms. So when it comes to our adult kids, what I've had to learn, and I've had to learn it the hard way, is that experience is a much better teacher than advice. Okay, I mean, I'm the guy who says, but why does she need to go to Europe to find herself? I have all the answers right here and right now. I'll just give it to her. It'll save a lot of time and money. You know, it just doesn't work that way. I've had to resist the urge to give advice without invitation. Where you once had a parent-child relationship, you now want to have an adult-to-adult relationship. And again, it's not always easy to get there quickly, but what you want to do is move from being the parent who's in control to becoming a parent who is a mentor and a coach. Now, some of this might seem counterintuitive because we were adults in a different generation than our kids. And this kind of sets up principle number 3, which is become a student of the culture. Now, our journey into adulthood was a different culture than our kids are living in now. And that's very important for us to understand as we parent them. And psychologist Jeffrey Arnett coined a phrase that I just think is an incredible phrase. It's called emerging adulthood. And he coined that phrase to help us understand this generation. Before that, there was no emerging adulthood. You were a teen and then you pretty much became an adult. And I'm thinking to myself, when he said this phrase, emerging adulthood, you know, was he living in my home? You know?
So Dr. Arnett says emerging adulthood is marked by 5 issues. I mean, the first one is the age of identity exploration. They're still trying to figure it out, who they are, who they're becoming. Secondly, is the age of instability. I mean, some of these emerging adults bounce around with jobs and relationships and housing. The third one, he says this is the most self-focused age of life. Because of all the things that are going on in their life, they're focusing on themselves. The age of feeling in between is the next one. They haven't really settled down. They aren't completely an adult yet, but they aren't a kid either. And then there's the age of possibilities and optimism. It's a great time for them. They have hopes and they have dreams and they want to play that out.
So it's important to be a student of our kids' culture. I mean, we just have to be. And we do this to learn how they see and understand the world so that we can see and understand them better.
Okay, so I have a question about, especially after learning a little bit more about emerging adulthood, what are some of the most important distinctions to be aware of, especially as it pertains to millennials?
Great question. I mean, that is a great question, because there are distinctions with millennials and emerging adults today that are different than it was before. First of all, they're shaped by technology. I mean, I don't need to tell you this, you know this, but it's how they work, it's how they communicate. For many, it's even how they meet someone and start dating them. Right. So they're shaped by technology. Not that we're not shaped by technology, but it's a major distinction for them. Another distinction, interesting enough, is that they don't live to work, they work to live. Okay, yeah. They're not going to get the gold watch. They're going to bounce around quite possibly. Some of us also bounce around. I don't mean that, but that's not a bad thing. They're actually more excited about doing other things in life than sometimes work. That's not what their grandparents did. Right. Okay, and maybe sometimes not what we did. We actually didn't have relationships in the proper place. But so that's a biggie, that they literally just don't live to work. They work, but they don't live to. Actually, this next one is a really good one too. Actually, they want a healthy marriage and they want a healthy family, but they're meandering toward responsibility and they're meandering toward marriage. So they're getting married later. So that's frustrating a lot of parents, because they're like, what happened? I mean, I got married young, so what happened to my kids? Well, they're meandering, but once they kick in, they care deeply about their marriages and they care deeply about their kids. And that's where you'll come in and be able to help mentor them and care for them. But again, it's going to come typically later. That's a major distinction. And then lastly, and this is a biggie, they see tolerance as one of the major traits of a loving person. This becomes interesting at the Christmas dinner and the Thanksgiving dinner, because let's say you have some values that are different than their values, or you brought them up with some morals, or in our case, in our family, a real biblical worldview. And that doesn't mean that you can't be loving, but maybe you have a different view than they do on certain issues. So this is where you get in the messy middle, where you can still embrace, I'm saying for parents, that with this distinction is that you embrace your strong worldview, and at the same time, you care and love for them. You don't have to agree on everything. No family's going to agree on everything. So this last trait, where they view tolerance as a form of loving, can be a real tough one for a lot of parents. And we could go on and on about that. But I think it's important that we do understand that our kids are growing up in a different culture. They are millennials, or actually even Gen Z. And that culture is a very different culture than the culture in which we lived. That doesn't make it easy. It makes it better, because now we become a student of the culture.
So I definitely have visions for what I thought my life would look like, this phase of life for my daughter, and they've definitely not been met. I want to understand my daughter, but it's hard not to be discouraged. So what can I do with these unmet expectations? Why, I can also learn to relate to her as my daughter.
You're not alone in this. And truly, so many people have the same feelings. That doesn't mean that those are bad feelings. We have to kind of sometimes lean into those feelings. But I think one of the tangible things is to make sure we're taking care of our own self. You've put all this time into dealing with your children. And now I'm not saying that you just give that up, but I am saying that now there's more time to do some self-care, to get physically, mentally, and spiritually healthy. And actually, one of the best things you can do for your daughter, for sons, is to honestly do that, to put some energy there. I find some of the most broken people are people who don't do that. And then they feel so disappointed because it didn't end up the way that they thought it was. Typically, adult children are with us longer. So, and the other thing I would say is adult children, we're gonna actually have adult children longer than we have our kids. That's crazy to think about. And so, make sure that you do self-care. And I can't say enough about that with people. I want to give them permission to do self-care. It probably never turns out exactly how we thought it was going to be. The other thing is parent with what I like to call awe. In fact, if you came into my office, I have a little Post-it note that says A.W.E. awe. And it stands for affection, warmth, and encouragement. And so I think at a time when, it's just not going perfect, make sure that you shower your daughter with affection. And, it could be touch. UCLA came out with a study that says it takes 8 to 10 meaningful touches for someone to thrive. Well, I'd much rather have them have authentic, beautiful, right kind of touch from mom or dad than I would from somebody else, because they're going to crave affection. So give them affection. Affection is also, hey, I'm proud of you. Affection is writing a nice note to them. It's bringing a little gift. It's cheering them on. That's affection. Also warmth. You know, I find that in a situation like this, what we really want to do is provide the warmth. So we set the tone. We set the atmosphere. A lot of times, frankly, we let our kids kind of run this, especially as they get to become adults. They come in, they're a whirlwind, they have these thoughts, they have these things, and in reality, they're setting the tone, and sometimes it can be negative. So you set the tone of warmth. My mom was like that. She set a tone. I mean, I can remember her telling me, oh, you know, I saw Chris, and he came by. I go, really? Yeah, he said, you know, his gym home, I wanted to hang out with him. And she said, no, he's down at the gym playing basketball. And then Chris said, well, can I come in and hang out with you? You know, that's who my mom was. Yeah. And yet at the same time, she had to put, you know, tough stuff in there. Okay, so we set the atmosphere, builds the right relationship. And then also encouragement. Oh, our kids as young adults need encouragement, maybe even more than when they were younger. And so I'm not saying you fake it. I'm just saying find things to encourage them. I love what Mark Twain said, I can live 2 months on one good compliment. Jesus actually affirmed Simon. He said, your name's not Simon anymore, it's Peter. Peter in the Greek, which the New Testament was written in, says the rock. I mean, he was named, Jesus nicknamed him the Rocky. Who became the rock of the Jerusalem church? It was actually Petros, Peter. And so Jesus affirmed him and he became who he affirmed him to be. So I think that's a key thing. So practice awe in the midst of that. And lastly, and this is a prayer that I try to pray all the time, and especially when things haven't gone as well. And I just simply say, teach me to parent the children I have, not the kids that I thought I would have.
When we talk about our parenting role with adult children, well, there's no way to avoid the issues of things like codependency, entitlement, and enabling dependence on us. Well, I know it can sting, but the fact is, many of us aren't able to move into our new jobs as parents of adult children because we don't want to lose the feeling of being needed. It's completely understandable, but it's not doing your child or you any favors. That's why these next two principles are vital. Principle number 4, they'll never know how far the town is if you carry them on your back. And the principle that follows is really the goal. Principle 5, move them from dependence to independence. And if you don't follow these principles, well, the result is a failure to launch.
So how do we help them see how far the town is? I mean, how do we move them from dependence to independence? Well, some things have really proven helpful, and one is to negotiate boundaries. Here's the phrase. When the pain of remaining the same is greater than the pain of changing, they'll change. So sometimes we have to allow them to have that pain. I think we can also express expectations and consequences. So yeah, there's times to keep our mouth shut most of the time, but we do need to keep those expectations and consequences in front. Things like rent is free if you're productive. If not, we're gonna charge. Okay, there's a consequence to not being productive. Honor our moral code in our home, or if you don't, then as an adult, then you have every right to move out. But that's the consequence to not living with that moral code. And then also develop an action plan. I mean, this sounds so not spontaneous, but it really is good, and it's a principle that works. Begin with the end in mind. What do you want? You want responsible adulthood. You want them to be able to get out on their own. You want them to be able to be that responsible adult. So you begin with the end in mind. You clearly discuss that with them, be very clear about your desired outcomes, and you create goals together. In fact, people support what they help create, so you get them, not in the heat of the emotion, but you get them helping to support that by creating it with you, okay? And if we as parents can finally land the helicopter, and some of us are still flying that helicopter with adult children, then we can start celebrating those rites of passages in their life. And really, we can move them from dependence to independence, move them toward independence and maturity. And hey, you may get to take a little credit for them becoming responsible adults.
Thanks for joining us for this special presentation of Doing Life with Your Adult Children. We hope you're already encouraged by what you've learned so far and are eager to take these principles into your relationship with your own children. Well, you've heard Jim talk about how he's developed these principles through research and personal experience with his adult kids. You've already heard how they can transform the family dynamic and create healthy, vibrant relationships. And this is why Jim is so passionate about teaching these transformational ideas. He wants to see you and your family have the healthiest relationships you can.
Well, that's exactly right, Candy. And I actually believe in the power of healthy parent and children relationships so much that I wrote a book about it. It's called Doing Life with Your Adult Children. And this puts structure and practical experiences around each of the 9 principles we're discussing today.
Well, this book is such a wonderful resource for parents of adult children, but you've also developed another great resource as well.
Yes, I have. I've actually developed a video course to dig into these ideas even more deeply and give you plenty of ways to put these strategies into practice. It's called the Doing Life with Your Adult Children video course, and it's going to teach you how to embrace your new role as a parent of an adult child so you can give them the passport to adulthood. It's going to talk about being a student of the culture so you can better understand them and parent them from that place. You can end enabling so that you can move them from dependence to independence, manage different values so that you can love them well, even in the midst of poor choices and consequences. You can also foster financial independence and responsibility so you don't have to keep them on the payroll forever. Topics like grandparenting and blended families and so much more.
Well, if you're like me, you might be feeling like this is just scratching the surface. So you may be wondering, how can I dig into these ideas even more? Well, we've created a bundle of really exciting resources for you as an individual or a group. So to learn more about that, you can visit homeword.com. And don't forget that you can also pick up a copy of Jim's book, Doing Life with Your Adult Children, wherever books are sold. But for now, Jim, let's get back to you and your guests as we continue this important conversation on parenting your adult children.
We've had some great conversations around the first 5 principles. But one thing we haven't touched on yet is the sting many parents feel when their child violates their values. I mean, what should we do? How can we guide our children back from what we see as destructive behavior or bad habits? And what about when our kids walk away from their faith? Though it can be painful, the principle to guide such seasons is powerful.
Oh, it is painful when a child violates our values. It almost always causes us to doubt our ability to parent and to wonder what went wrong. Well, the what ifs can paralyze our souls and wreak havoc on our confidence as a parent. But even when we can't change our circumstances, the attitude and the perspective we choose can and will make a difference. We have to take a victory any way we can. And one thing to remember when our children do violate their values, when they walk away from faith, when they engage in destructive behavior is this: it may be too late for prevention, but it's never too late for redemption. Now, here are some of the best things we can do as we show up for them in these difficult times. Maintain a climate of openness and grace. You know, our children need to know that no matter what road they travel, there's a path that leads home. And there's always the fact that the welcome mat will be out for them. Refuse to beat yourself up. You can, but it's not going to help you and it's not going to help them. Instead, put your energy into praying for your kids and trusting God for their future. Don't give up. And finally, continue to influence them. Just because lectures don't work, it doesn't mean that you can't influence your child. I mean, does every story of a straying child end happily? I mean, I wish I could say yes, but sometimes it's no. But the biblical principle still rings true. Train up a child in the way that they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it. You know, somewhere in there are the foundational truths that you imparted and the love that you poured out. So even when it looks like they've departed, remember, God has not departed from them.
Well, we've been able to scratch the surface on the first 6 principles, and we're going to go to this next principle. Of all the questions I receive from parents about these 9 principles, I think this one sometimes is the most frustrating, maybe the most delicate to maneuver. Everyone needs some help when it comes to money. What do you do when you want to encourage financial independence in your children while also helping them when they really need something? Now, I've rounded up some questions that I often get asked by people who have come into our seminars or into our different programs, and I've asked my guests here to kind of do a rapid fire Q&A with me. So let's get started as we talk about principle number 7, which is Financial independence and responsibility is the goal.
I don't want my kid to feel like I'm abandoning him, but I can't keep giving him money. How do I let him know I love him while cutting off his supply?
You know, rapid fire is hard for me, but here's the fact. 75% or more of parents of adult children do help their kids at one time or another. So that person's not alone, okay? But I would say this, and many times I think the best way to say I love you to your adult child when you're thinking about finances is to say no. I mean, we can bail our adult children out of bad financial choices, and they're gonna make some, but it's gonna stifle their ability to become responsible and independent with their finances, and that's the goal. So a no is sometimes the most loving thing we can give to our kids.
I have never really talked about finances